Hi, folks. Thanks for coming on tonight. I'm going to give people some time since it's only a couple of, so only a couple of, or there's still a couple minutes before we officially start. So just let people.
Ellen, you're in here twice, and I can tell you that's going to cause some echoing. So if you have a way of logging out of one of your devices, that would be great. You're in here twice, and I can tell you that's going to cause some echoing. So if you have a way of logging out of one of your
I'm
devices.
gonna leave and come back. I don't know why I'm in here too.
Oh, there's a lot of, okay. Maybe that's better.
Yeah, that should fix it.
Great.
Oh, there's
Okay, here we go. People are coming on. Fantastic. Great. Well, I can start talking about things that are not related to the school board. Like, did everybody hear that the piping plovers had 4 babies?
I heard that. I just read that. I was so excited. It's so nice when they close that area off to see it work. It's so exciting.
And
Yeah,
they're
That's nice
four.
news.
So Monty and Rose's progeny continues to thrive.
I love it. It's amazing.
For such a big number.
and the pressure's on for them to have like really good names. I need some really, really cute
Yes, yes,
morale.
yes.
For sure.
Yes, we need some good news. There's been some bad news,
Yeah.
Yes.
horrific news. Anyway,
Yeah. It's been a challenging week in so many ways. All right. Well, thank you all. I know people are going to continue to come on, and we will add people as they come on. So I am very excited to welcome you all tonight. I am Eileen Dordak, and I am the president of the 47th Ward Democratic Organization. We are here tonight for to meet all of our candidates for Chicago Public School District 4. And we will get started in just a couple of minutes. I want to, again, give people time to get on. First, I want to let people know, for those of you who maybe aren't involved with the 47th Ward, but this is your contact point with us, or if you have friends that you think might be interested, people who are on this this Zoom today who are part of the 47th Ward Dems are people who have gotten really involved with us. They've come to events, they've knocked doors. There are people who just showed up, and that's really how you get a vote in the 47th Ward Democrats. It's the people who show up, who are consistent, and it's really a engaged group of people, and anybody can get involved. We want people from all parts of the ward and all parts of life to get involved. So if you are not involved and want to be more involved, you're welcome. We're going to have a happy hour later on in the summer. We always have a event prior to early voting, or eve of early voting event, which will be coming up probably the Sunday before early voting starts in the fall. So if you're not already on our emailing address, hopefully you signed up so you can get our regular emails and find out the kinds of things that we are doing. So I will just kind of summarize. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from all 6 candidates who have submitted petitions, and we'll be hearing people in this order. First, Kimberly Brown, then Andrew Davis, Thomas Day, Ellen Rosenfeld, Karen Zacher, and Karma Giosa. Carmen, feel free to correct me on how to pronounce your last name.
Thanks, Eileen. Giosa.
Giosa. I was not terribly off. Okay. So, and Dr. Carmen Giosa will be our final speaker. I really hope that people will bring good questions. We're going to give each candidate 5 minutes where they can introduce themselves, talk about their priorities, and then at the end of that 5 minutes, I'm going to be timing. We will have up to 10 minutes for questions as long as we have questions, and we already have a lot, but we also would love to hear questions from people who are listening because people are going to say different kinds of things. So please feel free to chime in if you have some good questions. Let's see what else is on my list. Okay, that's about it. So I think that it is I have 6:04, but I think it's close enough. I'm sure we'll be getting some more people, but Kimberly, are you ready to go? Okay,
Can you audio check? Can you hear me?
yes, we can, no problem.
Awesome. And I'll have my little timer here also. That's what I was doing. To keep
Okay, go ahead.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And it's really nice to see everyone's faces. Thank you for having me. So my quick 5-minute intro, and I'm looking forward to questions. I like to say I bring experience and empathy for the school board. So I live on Belmont, close to the harbor. But for the experience, I am an organizational leader. So I have led large organizations in my career. For the scope of as close to the size of CPS as I think anyone can get, not many people can say they've run an organization the size of CPS, over $9 billion, hundreds of thousands of lives, over 650 schools. So I've led large organizations. I've been an executive at General Electric, the American Medical Association. I currently am a chief officer at a manufacturer that supports government agencies. And that is one that I am incredibly excited about that role, but even more so, I get to live out something that is something I've wanted to do for a long time in my life, which is step into a public service role. I have experience as a parent of 2 young children in CPS. I have experience as a nonprofit leader. I have experience as a board member. I've sat on boards both of large and small organizations. I am not a lawyer, but I am an armchair lawyer. So I've written, managed a lot of contracts, partnerships, and led a lot of cohesion, right? I'm also an adjunct professor. And one of the things I teach not only is a business and marketing strategies, but it's change management is one of the courses I teach. And I think that's something really critical when we think about what Chicago schools need as we look towards the future. Isn't more adults in the room arguing with each other, which doesn't really attract people to the system, nor is it what we teach our young people. It's how do we get in a room, especially as we think of what the job of a board is, and how do we build a culture of alignment and cohesion that the future needs. And that is change management at its core. How do we design a system, support our C-suite and leaders, support them to organize our system in a way that from the ground up, from the young people, the young scholars in our classrooms, the teachers that keep it working every day, our principals who do 7 days a week, they are on more than anyone else, the parents that are really being asked to do more and more every single day. And then I say empathy, right? Because I've been the parent who works multiple jobs with a spouse who travels to deal with the drop off and pickup and the after school that costs more than I expected for after school care for just a couple of hours. That doesn't include a lot of the extras that I expected. I have the empathy of someone who lived through in school where school was my safe place because I lived in a home that wasn't enjoyable for me. School was a place where I escaped. I have empathy because I know what food scarcity feels like. I know what it feels like to be hungry and not know where my next meal is going to come from. Where my teachers gave me the belief that I could be something better than what my parents were. My parents who made a lot of sacrifices, who worked multiple jobs because they believed that education was something better than what they could be. And the empathy because when I teach at Roosevelt University as an adjunct, I teach CPS graduates. And I got the opportunity to teach some of our first CPS graduates after COVID. Now, granted, they had their masks on still, so it was a little challenging. But I get to do that every day. And so when I say empathy and experience, it's really the ability to sit in a board of directors space in an incredibly large organization and operate as a parent of young people for the future parents, right? I'm in the game for the next 12 years, and I have friends and family across the city. And these are all of my little kids' lives. I walked a child into school the day after his mother died because that parent called me, because we build relationships. And I went to his house and I walked that little boy into school. And I have a relationship with the principal to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to walk this boy into school, and we surround it with community. Do we have the systems in place to make sure that every school is ready for that? Do we have the equality and the equity to make sure that you know that whatever CPS school you walk into, that you know what you're going to expect, and the equity to flex to meet that community where they're at? Are we ready to be the city that is really a global city? Not for what we were 100 years ago, but are we built to be where we need to be 100 years from now and support the executives and the full-time employees for what they can be, and build a culture, not of what the First Daily built, which was not built for success, but for where we need to be, for what our children need us to be. And that is a strength that I bring because I've done it successfully with every organization I've been at. And it's an honor to serve.
Great timing. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Okay, so now we have our question time. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but please go ahead and put them. You kind of mentioned this. Oh, go ahead, Anne. Why don't you start?
Thank you. Well,
There you
first of all,
are.
welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to learning more about you. And Kimberly, great to see you. I wanted to first of all thank you for reaching out to me and touching base, I don't know, maybe several months ago, and that was important to me. Following along with that, I'm wondering how you envision in this role intersecting and interfacing with your elected officials, whether local, state, or federal. How do you see the school board kind of meshing with us?
Yeah. So one, you do this. Oh, there you are. Sorry, it moved all of my windows around. Okay. One, I think it's being open-minded to ask the question and sit and hold space with you, right? Like you do this as a job and you have done it longer. So I think it'd be really important to sit with every individual, not just once, but multiple times, and build a regular cadence. When I start a job, right, the first thing you do is go on a regular listening tour, not just within the organization itself, but within the stakeholders, right? And you, Anne, and everyone else is a critical stakeholder and shareholder in this system. And so it's sitting and holding space and understanding where is the priority intersections as you see them. And one of my, we'll call them superpowers, is being able to connect the dots that others don't see, but building in a regular cadence. And that cadence might be more frequent in the beginning, and then we might build in a little more space between them. But understanding what you have in your map, how we can make sure that we have the literal touch points and build those in. Understanding, I like to say we're all aligned on the why. We all know why we're here. I hope so, right? We're here to make sure that literally our children survive and thrive, right? That they have the love for learning, that they continue to learn. We know what we're doing. We know our jobs. And the how is typically where people feel the static. So understanding where we align and don't align, and then building in a regular cadence to do that, and having the transparency through one-on-ones, through group conversations if we need to build consensus, and then honestly through the regular community feedback and community output. So I like to do regular communications, not only as my training as a journalist and as a communications professional, but also just as an executive leader. That's where I get the most feedback, and then through informal channels, right? You have to build trust.
Hey, Kimberly, I think I'm going to interrupt just at the end, just because we've got a lot of questions we want to get to.
Absolutely.
And I see
Thank
several popping up. So Ivan, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your comments, Kimberly. My questions are, well, first, CPS is horribly underfunded. We have a lot of children at risk, especially disabled children. What do you want to do if you want everyone to respect learning? I agree with that. How do we approach this given the current political situation and the lack of resources for a lot of children in this system who are not white and are not are basically not living in comfortable homes like many of us. So what do you think the
Great
school board
question.
will
Thanks,
do about
Ivan.
that?
Yeah, Ivan, you asked a big question that Eileen is gonna not, there's no amount of time that we can address it. So I will give you 3 points to the answer, and I saw the chat as well. I will drop my resume. One, we need people on the board who know how to read and write a contract. Some of the contracts are atrocious. That is the job of a board, right? So you need to know how to do that. You need to know how to negotiate against something like an error mark, A, because you lose a lot of money. B, people in CPS are paying 1.2 to 1.5 more than retail. We should be part of the procurement consortium, if not as good as them, better than Illinois. We should be getting the best pricing on the market. That is negotiation. That is bare none. We need to free up dollars. 3, we should be doing a forensic financial audit as soon as we get this board in place, period. We need to know where the money is to free it up. But 4, there's still not going to be enough money. So here's the real deal. No board ever has had enough resources, time, money, or people at all. That is the job of the board. The pie is not big enough. Your job as a board is to come in and make the pie bigger. And anyone who says it can't be done needs to find another job. That is the job of the board. And yes, we need to make the pie bigger, but getting up there and arguing and being an activist is not going to get it done. There are people whose jobs, the prison system, corporations have found money. There are a lot of people in this world that are invested in ways to make education bigger. You need creative individuals who know how to make the pie bigger. There is money in the world. We need to find it, and we need a board of people who have experience in finding resources and expanding the pie. And that doesn't mean selling out, and that doesn't mean cutting cost. There's a difference there, and we can do it. And when we get these young people, I cannot control their home, right? I've been there. I cannot control home life. As soon as they step out that door, that is our sphere of control. And I swear that we will do everything we can. We will bring buses back. None of this matters if we can't get those kids to school. Let's get them to school. And once we get them into school, let's get them fed and clothed. Because if those kids aren't fed, they will not learn. And all we can do, and I heard this from the principal of Lakeview High School, and Eileen, I'll leave it at this. I don't care if they can read at their grade level. That is a long-term solution. Do they love to learn? Do they believe they can learn? And will they commit to a lifelong of learning? And you know what? We can quantify that. Do they know where the library is? And do they commit to a lifelong of learning? And if we can do that, we can save the world. We can build a world of a population of children that believe that they are worth learning and have the skills to continue that journey, no matter what grade level they came in. That, Ivan, we can do.
Thank you, Kimberly. I want to ask you kind of our rapid fire questions, which
Please.
should have pretty quick answers. So what is your experience with CPS? I think you mentioned a little bit. Can you just summarize that?
Yes. So I have one child that's going into first grade. I have been a volunteer within CPS for almost 4 years. I did not get involved as the LSC elections because I knew I was going to do this and did not want to resign. So I was involved in the board, if we'll call it like the boosters, the friends of, as a board of directors, financially supporting the CPS schools, and have worked in nonprofits that have been hired by and directly supporting CPS, either as a volunteer or an advisor.
Great, thank you. Would you vote to close or reduce funding for selective enrollment schools?
No.
Would you accept the endorsement of NICS, the charter school lobby?
Oh, I qualified.
Qualified. Okay. Can you be more specific or?
I don't believe in expanding charter schools, but I don't believe that we need to close any that exist if they're performing, because I think at this point, all that does is increase divisiveness in the city and penalize the parents and children. And I think in at least the next 5 years, we don't need to do that. So as long as we're on the same page of let's not close schools when they're performing, because all we're doing is tearing families and kids apart and pitting our citizens against each other. As long as we're on the same page, and I believe we need a board of directors with board experience, I'm good.
Thank you. I also want to squeeze in here. that we know that CPS schools are, I'm sorry, CPS students are disproportionately exposed to violence here in Chicago.
Yes.
And as a member of the Chicago School Board, what do you see as something that the school board can do in regards to resources to help kids with that, or citywide?
Oh my gosh, this is where we tap into culture. Our agencies don't talk to each other. So one, we don't have enough caseworkers, but two, every time a shot is fired, those kids go into some kind of lockdown. You do that a handful of times, you've already got trauma. So I can't control what happens in the home, but we've got a disproportionate system that is going to take every city agency time to unwind. And I will say this forever. You asked me the question, Kim, you seem like a smart person. Why are you doing this free job? Because I believe in this city, I've lived in this city, and I'm staying in this city. And if you and my kids, my babies are in this city, you want to change this city, you fix schools. You get those kids into school, you get every agency to wrap around service in that school. You know a kid is going to prison and you budget for that prison system by 3rd grade. Why don't we budget for our high schools that same way? There are wraparound supports and agencies that work together and they don't talk to each other. The board of directors has the power and the influence. We need every board and every board member to do their damn job. And if we get the right people in place in a constructive way that brings adults together, we can do this. We can make agencies work together. And we do need more support at the ground level. And we do need people to make enough money. And it's not just teachers. It's all the people that help them.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your impassioned answers, really. Okay, thank you. I know that, and I will say in general, all of the candidates tonight are going to be going back and forth between here and One Northside, so we understand. Don't worry, we don't think you're ditching out on us at all. We completely understand. And also, if everybody could put in the chat, if you have any endorsements so far, that would be really great. All right.
Okay.
So
I appreciate it. I will duck out. I did see the question. So when I come back, I will drop my resume attached. Does that sound good?
yeah, no problem.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Okay. And next on our schedule is Andrew. Andrew Davis. Unfortunately, I don't see Andrew on the Zoom. Am I wrong, Marissa?
Is it Andy? There's an Andy.
Oh, there's an Andy. Andy, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Fantastic.
fantastic. Oh, I'm sorry. There you are, right there.
Sorry,
Okay,
I
Andrew.
respond to either.
Okay, Andy, it's all yours. 5 minutes to introduce yourself.
Great. Good evening. And thanks very much for inviting me to this forum. Since deciding to run for school board, I have been asked, why are you running for school board? What do you stand for? Explaining my answers to these 2 questions is my objective here tonight. Here's my answer. First of all, my youngest son is a student at Lincoln Park High School. I care about our schools as only a parent can care. More broadly, though, I'm a lifelong resident of Chicago, and I'm deeply concerned for our city's future. I believe the city's 2 biggest problems are violent crime and education. Violence is an immediate challenge, and while I hope for the best, I don't know what I personally can do to address this issue. In the longer term, though, I believe education is an even bigger challenge for Chicago, and I want to help. Recently, CPS announced with some pride improvements in student learning assessments to pre-pandemic levels. I'm an optimist, and so I applaud these results. But the truth is that while the movement is positive, the absolute level of overall results is horrid. Among lower income students, who as a group make up roughly 3/4 of CPS, barely 1 in 4 third graders is reading at grade level. In 3rd grade, students traditionally transition from learning to read to reading to learn, and the student that can't read in 3rd grade will be at a severe disadvantage from 4th grade on. Realistically, hope for the non-reader's future is tenuous. We've got to do better. Student achievement must be our unrelenting goal. More specifically, I propose that we focus resources on 3rd graders across the city and do whatever it takes to ensure that the vast majority of them complete 3rd grade as competent readers. I'm not an educator, so I do not have the expertise to design this plan. But as board member, I will demand that our CEO, his central office staff, and all of our educators serving in the hundreds of schools across the city design and execute a program that will have literacy as a minimum expectation and achievement for students all across the city. Secondly, I believe parental choice and community involvement are necessary conditions for a successful school system. No matter how well trained and intentioned the professionals in our school system are, no one knows a child better than the parents. We must respect and value the choices that parents wish to make for their students. These include selective enrollment schools, magnet schools, and other public school choices beyond the neighborhood school. In June this year, I read with pride about 2 CPS students admitted with full ride scholarships to Stanford University. Both students' families had made a choice to attend a public school other than their default neighborhood school. That choice paid off. I believe that restricting or discouraging that sort of ambition and success is a disservice to all our children. Finally, I believe that budgetary transparency is absolutely essential. If we're to make great efforts for a massive system-wide improvement in student achievement and outcomes, it'll be necessary to adopt full budget transparency. The delays that we've experienced this year in revealing where the money is going builds distrust and cynicism. With total per student spending approaching $30,000 per year, Chicago's taxpayers, parents, and residents are entitled to know where is the money going. I've been working with some of CPS's best educators for the last 10 years. In my role at the Education Equity Fund, we have helped over 150 CPS educators afford excellent graduate school training that advance their careers and make them more effective educators. I never cease to be amazed and impressed by the passion and commitment to Chicago's children that our educators bring to work every day. They deserve our full support. And as a board member of CPS, I will advocate for clear educational objectives, starting with universal third grade reading. I will work to provide the resources necessary to achieve this and to seek to cut out unproductive box ticking and administrative overkill. If we ask our educators to carry out a clear mission, give them the resources to do so, and eliminate unnecessary bureaucracy, then with transparent budgeting for all to see, and the dynamic edge that involved, empowered parents provide, we can make CPS the best big city school system in the country, and that's my goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate it. Okay, now we're gonna do some questions. Go ahead, Anne, why don't you start?
Hi there, Andy. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
I will say I've been state representative in the 11th district for the past 12 plus years. And during that time, I focused a considerable amount of time and energy on education issues, school funding, governance, of course, and I did sponsor the implementation for the elected school board bill this spring. I have not met you before in the education space, and I haven't heard from you since you've been running. So with that in mind, how do you envision the partnership between the school board members and their local elected officials? Because there really is a ton of overlap. And so considering that I'm looking for a partnership role here, can you kind of elaborate on your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, it's very complicated, but I think in some ways it's very simple, which is that my experience and knowledge of Springfield is that Springfield is willing to act and eager to act when they have a clear plan and there's some consensus on what needs to be done and how important it is. And what you don't react very well to in Springfield is having different people singing dissonantly out of tune. And so when one group comes down and says X and the other group comes and says Y, that leaves legislators in a difficult position because they've got a lot of issues. And while our 10 billion-ish budget for CPS is large, you guys are dealing with a 50-ish billion-ish budget, and there's only so much time in the day. So I would say the starting point for the school board and for the community of Chicago writ large is to create consensus locally and present a plan that has harmony and support from across the city. So, for example, this spring, when we started out with a very well-intentioned, I believe, budgeting plan that involved a greater emphasis on equity, the funding of it and the funding model, it seems to me, was a political mistake, which was to start by taking roughly a third of the schools in the city, some of the magnet schools and some of the selective enrollment schools, and particularly schools in the 4th district for that matter, and tell them their budgets are going to be cut in order to give money that was desperately needed, undeniably, to other schools in the city. That was a mistake, because what they did was they immediately took a third of the city and steamed their rice. So if they had instead gotten together and said, listen, we need more resources, we need to come up with a plan for the entire city and go to Springfield together, I think we would have gotten a better result. As it is, I believe you guys more or less told the city, come back later, we're busy now.
Okay, thank you for that answer, but I would just invite you to kind of reframe it a little bit, because I really consider myself, even though I am on the state level as elected official, to be really working on the ground with our local schools. And I'm hopeful that that will also be true with the school board members when they get elected. I mean, we really, aldermen, local officials, we really do really get kind of in the weeds on the school funding issues with our individual schools. So just some food for thought. Thank you so much.
Go
Certainly,
ahead,
thank you.
Ivan. Why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, so I have a similar question that I asked before.
Thanks.
School system has terrible inequalities, and I understand your concern about the magnet schools and others, but they have been receiving resources that others have not for many years. Our school system needs to support everyone, and I fail to see how, well, a couple of things. One is, let's go back to, there's disabled children. I still haven't heard anyone talking about that. I know that's a crisis in our school system. There's kids who come from poverty. Yeah, I know there's nothing we can do.
You know
about
what,
that.
Ivan, let's let
Okay,
Andy
I'll
jump
stop it.
in. Okay,
All right.
thanks. All
Let
right,
me
go ahead,
start there.
Andy. How would you like to answer the question about equity?
Yeah, talk
Sure.
about it. Okay.
I think it's a,
know a
I
lot
think it's a,
about it. Sorry.
I think it's a great question, and I certainly hope that my response didn't in any way indicate that I don't think that there are schools, cities, and neighborhoods in the city and children that deserve a lot more than what they have. What I would say is I've yet to see a Chicago public school that I thought was over-resourced. And so when we start out a new plan by cutting some schools, I'm just simply not in favor of that. Where I do think but that implies that we need more resources. And to that, I think a starting point would be the teacher pension fund. Chicago, as some of you may know, is the only district in the state that funds its own teacher pensions. And every other district, whether it's Evanston or Decatur or Rockford or Springfield, the state of Illinois pays the teacher pensions. So the city of Chicago is, and the taxpayers here are paying over $500 million a year, roughly speaking, into a teacher pension fund, which I believe is in fact the responsibility of the state. So I would say a starting point for getting more resources for the schools that desperately need more resources, but without cutting it from schools that I don't believe are over-resourced, although relatively speaking they may be, is to go together with the local representatives, such as Representative Williams, and go to Springfield and say, listen, this is fundamentally unfair. For whatever reason it first got here, the time is long gone when that was the right answer here. The state of Illinois' pension fund for teachers should be merged with Chicago public school teachers, and the responsibility for funding it should be broadly borne across the state of Illinois. That would save $500 million a year.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, I'm going to give you the lightning round questions now.
Sure.
Okay, what's your experience with CPS other than we know you have a child, you're a parent? Is there any other involvement?
I was on LSC for a while at Newberry School when my kids were in preschool there. And for the last 10 years, the not-for-profit that I run, Education Equity Fund, has worked closely with both the Academy for Urban School Leadership and with UIC's Ed Doctor program and Urban Education Leadership, where we make zero interest loans to Chicago teachers that want to get advanced degrees to advance their careers and increase their skill set, or in the case of UIC, to become principals. One of the students that we funded, actually, I'm so proud of because he just won the Golden Apples Illinois State Principal of the Year Award. This is Brian Kelly, who's the principal. Dr. Brian Kelly is the principal at Martin Luther King Junior College Prep down in 4500 South Drexel. So we've been working closely with those teachers and principals for 10 years.
Great. Okay. Would you vote to close or reduce funding or any other supports for selective enrollment schools?
No.
Okay. Would you accept the endorsement of the NICS?
That stands for what? I'm familiar with the Illinois
I'm sorry,
Network
it's the
of Charter
charter
Schools.
school lobby, yeah.
The Illinois Network of Charter Schools is an organization I'm familiar with, and
Yeah.
I would accept their endorsement if they would give it. I've not asked for it.
Great. Would you support respecting trans and queer kids' pronouns and gender identities in school?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, I would like to also ask you the question about violence in Chicago that disproportionately affects Chicago Public School students for many reasons. How do you see the board as helping with that?
I think that's a very tough one. I mean, in the very narrow sense, the decision recently of the board to tell schools, notwithstanding what the schools wanted, what the LSCs wanted, what the parents wanted, that they were not permitted to have resource officers in their schools, I would not support that. I don't think every school needs one, but I think that's a decision that's best made locally. So in terms of a real here and now issue of how we deal with violence, I'm against the board's recent prohibition of resource officers in schools. I think if the local school LSC wants it and the parents wants it, they should have them. Beyond that, I mean, violence obviously is a citywide problem. It doesn't just exist inside the schools. It exists outside the schools, in the grocery stores and the parking lots. And whatever we can do to coordinate with other agencies and branches of government, I think is great. But I think fundamentally, I think the Chicago Housing Authority ought to be dealing with housing and have the primary role in that. And I think CPS's primary role should be in education.
Okay, thank you. There is a question. Jesse, will you ask the question that you're specifically interested in for Croaks bill, Margaret
All
Croaks?
right. It's where do you stand on Croaks bill that was supported by Ann Williams for selective enrollment schools? And if you're not familiar with it, it says no changes in
I'm very
policy
familiar
regarding.
with it.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with it. I'm 100% in support of it. There's nothing that has come out of Representative Croak or Williams' office that I'm opposed to.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I think we have answered all the questions and our time is up. Andy, thank you. I know you were talking fast to get all that in, but we really appreciate you answering all the questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And if you can, Andy, to put in, if you do have any endorsements, put that in the chat, please.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Okay, I am now going to open it up for Thomas Day to introduce yourself. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Eileen, if you can give me the thumbs up. If I've had some internet challenges.
Yeah, we hear you just fine. No problem.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me here. I know this organization is likely to support my opponent for obvious reasons. I understand that, and but you know what? I'm still thankful and honored that you agreed to share some time with me. I know that all of you understand that our city and our schools and our kids are served by this democratic process. It's not about clout, and it's not about the lack thereof of clout. This is about our families. This is about our kids, our teachers, and that's why I'm in this race. I'm Thomas Day. I'm a Lincoln Park resident. I have a 5-year-old who's going to go to Hawthorne next year. I'm an Iraq War veteran. I'm proud to be endorsed by Alderman Ragesbach and Alderman Conway and maybe a few others who will be receiving phone calls from Paul Rosenfeld soon. Paul, if you're listening, please stop doing that. I sub every once in a while at Tubman Elementary. I'm a lecturer at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. I teach a class in regional economics and technology policy. And in March of this past year, something happened that called me to join this race. That day, one of the most powerful members of the Chicago City Council, an ally of Mayor Johnson's, spoke at a rally in front of City Hall where an American flag was burned and he summoned radical militants to go attack the Democratic National Convention in August. Of course, his actions were later essentially endorsed by City Hall, or by the City Council. Later that week, when he was permitted to remain in his leadership chair and escape censure. That was the moment where I was confronted with a choice that I, as a father of an incoming CPS kid, would I look the other way, or would I stand and fight for reason and good governance? I did not support Brandon Johnson's campaign to be our mayor, and I certainly didn't organize because I knew that for way too long in Chicago, we have yielded to the loudest voices in the room. We have been forced to endure endless work stoppages and vile rhetoric from Stacey Davis Gates. We have allowed special interests to define progressivism in a way that suits them and exploit grievance for their own gain. And as far as CPS goes, the results speak for themselves. Spending on Chicago public schools has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. While student enrollment has decreased by 80,000 students during the same time period, property taxes have been maxed out to fund CPS schools. And the results of all of this spending, students are a year behind pre-COVID test scores, chronic absenteeism, 40%, and the average age of a Chicago public school is nearly 85 years old. We are facing $3 billion in urgent capital repairs and a nearly $400 million structural deficit. This is what happens when you turn over our government and our schools to special interests, with people who are okay burning an American flag in front of City Hall. When you turn over to people who are out for power and not for our kids. I have walked every block of this district, met thousands of voters, and I hear your frustration. I hear the fear that Mayor Johnson and CPS insiders are going to cut selective enrollment schools. And I also hear and fear, probably heightened in the past few days, that we may be soon confronted with another Trump presidency. Let me be clear. We beat Trump by showing the world what a city looks like when Democrats are in control. We aren't doing that real well right now. We're at a real crisis point here. I'm running because somebody has to make some tough calls around here. Politics of grievance and convenience can't rule when it involves our kids. Mayor Johnson is going to have a ton of allies in this race and a ton of allies on the board. He'll be appointing 10 members to the board, as everyone well knows. He'll have a few that are elected in other districts. I am the only consistently anti-Brandon Johnson candidate in this race that I know of, and I look
Thank you,
forward to the next few months.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, we're gonna start doing our questions. So I would like to start with an equity question. How do you see getting equity across the school district? There obviously are really different resources in different parts of the city. And so what is your plan for the school board to improve equity?
We need to fundamentally shift this conversation around equity. Mayor Johnson and his allies have very compellingly kind of built a foundation for these conversations, that we support equity by accepting the segregated nature of our city and the schools and channeling more resources toward under-resourced schools. That's a very compelling argument he makes. I completely acknowledge it. I want to do something fundamentally different, and that is harness the power of integration and make sure we're integrating our schools. So part of this funding formula that I suspect everybody is well aware of is, there's a 12 points for. One of them is, we give some points for schools that are 90% one race. We shouldn't have any schools in Chicago that are 90% one race. So, I think we need to look very seriously at a capital development plan that looks at schools that are as old as Wrigley Field sometimes and build new integrated schools. So, I mentioned I teach at the Harris School of Public Policy at U Chicago. One of my favorite economists is a guy, Raj Shah. He's at Harvard. He took a bunch of data on income taxes that the Obama administration gave him and regress that against Facebook friendships, right? Understanding who climbs the ladder of income mobility and what explains who is more successful at climbing the ladder of income mobility. And what he found is through Facebook friendships is the strongest predictor of upward mobility in the United States is friendships with folks at the top of the income ladder. And that's what selective enrollments do, selective enrollment schools do, which is why I'm so strongly in favor of funding these schools and expanding enrollment, not squeezing their funding. Equity is served by integration. Folks, we do not celebrate the sacred name of Thurgood Marshall because he enforced separate but equal. No, we celebrate Thurgood Marshall because at a time when we had schools in the Deep South that were old, that were not serving our students, he went to the Supreme Court, obviously in a much different time, and demanded we integrate our schools. We should be doing the same thing in Chicago.
Thanks, Thomas. Anne, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Eileen. Thomas, my name is Ann Williams, and I'm the state representative for the 11th district, which pretty much encompasses most of the 4th district for the school boards. And in the past 12 plus years as state rep, I have focused a considerable amount of my time and energy on education issues, funding, governance, obviously, working on the elected school board. We have not met. I'm not familiar with you. I don't recall you being part of the education conversation over the past several years. So, and I haven't heard from you since you decided to run this time. Wondering then how you view the potential partnership between, or how you envision the role of school board member interfacing with the local elected officials.
So I have to look at my call list. I believe I have reached out to at least a number of folks who I know have endorsed Ms. Rosenfeld. If I did not reach out to you, Representative Williams, I apologize. As far as communication across the different units of government, I'm absolutely very eager as a representative potentially of the 4th district to engage very closely with your office and engage very closely with other elected representatives and even the mayor who I have been so harshly critical of. I am happy to engage, but we need help from Springfield. Okay. We need to talk about pension reform. I believe Mr. Davis gave a passive reference to it earlier. Look, I don't know why Dems are so uneasy about this topic. I mean, we have 2 constitutional officers statewide who are already on record supporting pension reform. They did pension reform in Arizona. That obviously worked out well for not Arizona, Arizona and New Hampshire. Arizona, Rhode Island. I apologize. And they did it equitably and fairly. We send, as you well know, about $1 in every $4 to Springfield that go to pensions. That's money we could be investing in students to get our students back on track from all that they have lost during the COVID-19 lockdowns that, in my judgment, went on way too far. Went on way too long. When we talk about, the Springfield CPS discussion, we need to talk about this because, out messaging the truth is not going to work. We know we have some real budgetary challenges ahead, and that's going to mean some really tough decisions ahead. And it's going to require a ton of political courage. I'm not just talking about pension reform. I'm also talking about consolidating disenrolled schools. And we need some help from some folks in Springfield, because this $400 million budget deficit that could grow to 700 million, even beyond that, the union wants a 9% pay increase. We can't fight this battle ourselves. And that's where we need to talk, both your office, my office potentially, and others as well.
Great.
Well, I wasn't exactly to clarify, I was not just referring to the campaign call that you referenced. I'm talking about the past 12 years of my work on school issues, not having been familiar with you in the space. I do know, though, however, that you've been pretty involved politically. I think you put your name in the ring for maybe Congress, possibly the Senate seat appointment, maybe county commissioner. That's what I've heard anyway. Is that the case? And if so, what argument would you have as to why you've now found the right fit for you to run for office? Is it about the kids
So
here?
I see what you're doing, Representative Williams. Thank you.
Sorry.
Look, I have looked for opportunities to serve. Public service has been my life since I got out of college and served in the military. This was approached to me by Alderman Waguespack because he knows my bent, right? He knows I'm a progressive, but I'm a fiscally responsible progressive. And no one else is stepping out and bringing some of the issues that I'd like to discuss during this campaign to the discussion. So I'm in, and I'm in for the right reasons. Yes, I sense you're trying to suggest that I am an opportunist. We all are. That's the nature of politics. But I have a 5-year-old who's going to go to Hawthorne next year, and I would not be in this race if I did not have a vested interest. I've seen some of the challenges that CPS faces as a sub over at Tubman. This is what local government is about: bringing ideas to the surface, fighting for them, and strengthening our democracy, which is why you sponsored that bill to have this elected school board in the first place.
Well, all I'm going to say is feel free to reach out anytime. I have received some, it looks like, policy thoughts you had via tweet. I see you referencing Allies of Ellen Rosenfeld, which I assume is me, wishing that we had protected students in Springfield. Curious what that might mean. I'd rather kind of have that conversation one-on-one, and that's what I'm here for as the state representative, focusing on school issues. So feel free to reach out, and I'd invite anyone, of course, to do that. I've been part of this conversation my entire career, and that's why I'm so excited about the partnership of the school board member. And with that, thank you for your time.
With our last few seconds, I'm going to just ask you a couple of the rapid fire questions. Would you accept the endorsement of the INCS?
No.
Okay. And do you feel that CPS should support trans queer kids by respecting their pronouns and gender identity?
Strong.
Yes. Okay, great. And I think you've answered all the questions we had about the selective enrollment. So I think very good.
Much.
Thank you very much for your impassioned responses. Whoops. Okay, thanks, Thomas. All right, next we have Ellen Rosenfeld. Ellen, you've got 5 minutes to introduce yourself.
Hello, 47th Ward. Thank you for having me. Wow, that's quite something to go after. I am not about politics. I am about the kids, and I'm in this for the kids. I'm also not an opportunist, so we're not all opportunists. I am so excited about this. I'm excited to be with the 47th Ward. That's the place I fell in love with CPS. It's my home, and it's the neighborhood school that all 4 of my kids went to. So thank you for hosting this, and thank you for bringing everyone's voice to the table. I appreciate it. 43rd Ward did something very similar. Anyway, my bio is I have been in Chicago public schools my entire adult life. I sent 4 kids to CPS schools, a neighborhood school, also to selective enrollment in high schools. I have 1 left in CPS. As a teacher on the South Side, I taught at Hardigan Elementary and Dulles Elementary, so 2 under-resourced schools. I got a master's of education from the University of Illinois at Chicago because I wanted to learn more about urban education And I was on the LSC. I served as the chair of the LSC where all 4 of my kids went. So I've learned more about budgeting that way. I also served on the local school council advisory board. So I was able to, on a big district level, work on LSC matters. And finally, I currently work for the district. So I think that's what makes me unique as well. I work in family and community engagement within Chicago Public Schools. So I understand the system better than any other candidate in District 4 because of my lived experience. And that's why I decided to run for this board. I'm looking for a district that is stable and predictable. I've been through a lot with the 4 kids going through it as a teacher, as an LSC chair, and currently working for Chicago Public Schools. So I'm looking for predictability and stability. I am going to focus on students. I think Ivan keeps referencing equity within students. I want to make CPS work for all students. I want to help CPS and make it work as well for all families as it's worked for my family. And that wasn't always easy. Getting 4 kids through Chicago Public Schools had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of decisions, a lot I had to do to make that work. I want to retain good teachers in under-resourced schools. I know what it felt like to be a teacher in an under-resourced schools. It's exhausting. We have a lot of kids who have been through a lot of trauma. There has to be incentives to stay in those schools. From things like buying the toilet paper to in the classrooms, to pencils, to, adopting classes and students to be, served by other people in my community. I know what it feels like to work down there. So I do want to bring more resources, and I do want to acknowledge that I will serve the entire district, and I've been in the entire district. I also want to increase parental involvement. The cornerstone of any student's success, and I think most people on here are parents, is how well is it working at home? Do parents feel like they can walk into the school? I've been to probably 25, 30 Chicago Public School board meetings. I know how hard it is as a parent to get into a board meeting. I know how hard it is as a parent to get into some schools. I'm also the only candidate who has been in all 13 of our parent universities. So I want to increase programming at parent universities so that more parents can come, and whether they're learning how to navigate Aspen, so they know whether a child was in school, what are their grades, communicate with teachers, how to work a Google Meet, or to ESL classes and, language classes, GED classes, banking classes. So we have these incredible parent universities that are really under-resourced. I'm going to prioritize that. Finally, I'm going to prioritize making the Board of Education accessible to all. So I want to have a Board of Ed, that everybody feels like they can come to. Somebody asking here how we're going to engage local school counselors. We're going to invite them to our town halls and to our Board of Education meetings so we can hear the voice of the local school council and we can hear the voice of the community. For the very first time, finally, at last, we are able to bring the voice of the parents and the community to Chicago Public Schools. I think the only person that's right for this board is a person that has been on all sides of CPS. And now I'm going to wrap it up. So that's me, and that's why I'm excited to run, and I'm excited to be here with the 47th Ward. I'm not about politics. I am all about the kids.
Thank
Okay.
you so much, Ellen.
Yeah.
It's fun. Try to give a little signal.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to ask some questions now. We had that question about equity. I think that you kind of started to answer that, but do you have any concrete ways that as the school board you could implement equity in the way you'd like to see it?
So I just feel like we have to make sure all of our programs are equitable and they're inclusive. We are going to, obviously the budget is a big issue. We are going to have to seek new revenue sources so that we can make sure students everywhere are getting what they need. We have to go into the communities. When I taught on the South Side, we had such chronic absenteeism till we went into the communities and we talked to the parents and we educated the parents on what that really means to get your kid to school every single day, not just 2 days a week. So we need to get to the grassroots level. We also have to acknowledge the trauma of COVID, the trauma that our students live through, and we have to teach to that. So increase in spending for more counselors and more social workers and a curriculum that speaks to the trauma. We have third graders that missed kindergarten and first, or their teacher was in a mask, but we're still teaching them a third grade curriculum. That's a really hard thing to do for a student, a young person. So we can spend all the resources in the world and then not be able to get to the kids, not really do a deep dive, a real needs assessment into what do we need from these kids to get them into the buildings.
Great, thank you. So let's go through some of the questions that we asked the other candidates. Jesse, do you want to ask your question about the bill?
Yeah, do you support the Croak bill on selective enrollment schools?
100% I support that bill. I don't think any of these decisions should be being made until we have an elected school board. We're so close. So I 100% support that bill.
Okay. And, you were talking about getting parents involved at school board meetings.
Mhm.
And somebody had talked to me about a question earlier, like people come to the end of the school board meetings and they make comments. How do you envision following up on that, integrating that into the work that the board does?
I think the way the whole school, what's exciting about being the first elected school board is we can do things completely different. So what you say, Eileen, the idea of coming and making a 2-minute comment and the next one and the next one and the next one, and then what is the follow-up? What is the follow-through? That's why I want to be boots on the ground. I really want to be in the communities. I want to listen to what parents are saying, what needs are not being met, and then follow up. Work with the board, with all of the 10 of us that are elected and 11 that are appointed, so that we can come together and solve some of these problems. We have to start with the problems. I remember when I was teaching, I used to think like one student at a time. If I can make it better for that one student. And I've been working one student at a time, one family at a time, one LSC at a time. Now finally is an opportunity for me to use all of my talents and all of my skills within CPS and work on the entire district. And that's what I'm really, really, really excited to do.
Great, thank
And
you.
it's very scary sort of to go to a board meeting. Like you have to be online to get in. And then once you get in, you're allowed the 2 minutes. And it's not the most welcoming environment. As a employee of Chicago Public Schools, I've worked on that side of it. I know what it's like to escort people in, and I talk to the parents and I talk to them as they're coming in, and they're really anxious. They're really nervous to come in and be a part of that. I want to make it more welcoming and more within communities. I don't think it needs to be in time like that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So earlier we asked the question about violence. We know that Chicago public school students are disproportionately affected by violence. What do you think the board could do to impact that and make things better for our students?
I really want to increase more social workers and more counselors, and then give them incentives to stay down there. We have to work with the kids that are traumatized day in and day out. When I taught at Dulles, I literally brought a cot into the room because so many of my students were so tired from staying up at night. And as simple as once they were able to get rest, they were able to start learning. So we have to acknowledge the violence, and then we have to create programs like that tell the kids that we understand we're going to give them wraparound services and follow through with them and hang on to them so that we can continue. We can't teach them if they're hungry, if they're tired.
Great. We have a couple questions that came in. What is your stance on cutting funding for selective enrollment or reducing resources for selective enrollment or magnet schools?
Well, it would be ridiculous to do that. They are the best schools in the entire state of Illinois. We don't need to do that. We can continue to fund our selective enrollment schools at the level that they are funded at and work with neighborhood schools. My kids went from a neighborhood school to a selective enrollment school. So there is no reason to do anything but to continue to promote and provide resources to selective enrollment schools and we need to educate our students that so that more of our kids are able to go to these high schools and get this level of education. So I would never ever be foreclosing those schools or anything like that.
Okay. I'm trying to think people, the chat's getting longer, so I'm having trouble finding if there are more questions. All right. I think we have gotten close to the end of the questions. I know yesterday we were, there was a question about if you would ask for the full, oh my gosh, people, what's the question I'm trying to ask about the property taxes? Oh, yes. Would you accept the INCS endorsement?
So I understand that the Board of Education, our job is governance. So I do not want to be a part of any special interests. So whether that be INCS or CTU or any of the other special interest groups, you know, our charter kids are our CPS kids, our CPS kids are our CPS kids, our alternative school kids are our alternative school kids. So I want to work together, collaborate, and take care of all the kids in CPS.
Right. And we have just like one more minute left. We have a lot of new
I see a
people.
question by a CTU member.
Oh,
I'm
are
not
you-
a CTU member. I was a teacher. I'm no longer a teacher. I work for the Board of Education now. So I work for Chicago Public Schools. I don't work as a teacher.
we have a lot of new students coming in from other countries, and I believe you might have some experience with that in your network. And how do you think that board could help respond to all the influx of new students that we're getting?
Yeah, we did a lot of work around families that came to CPS from, and again, because I work for the board, I was able to really be involved in this, but from meeting the students and getting them enrolled in schools to providing them with clothes, buses to get to different schools. And some things I know about Chicago Public Schools we get right, and some things we don't get right. And so, you know, initially we sent kids to schools that were near where they were initially put to live. Eventually they moved, but we were still busing them up to the schools. So we didn't keep track of them as well as we should have in terms of getting them into the right buildings. And then we saw what happened as a result of that. So many of them quit coming. We also had to work, we did a very good job working on the parent side of it. So ESL classes, we had a lot of migrant families come to our classes at the Network One Parent University just to learn how to navigate CPS. And we were able to sit down with them. So I would like to increase programming at the parent universities so that we get parents. We were going to do like a road
You know what,
show.
Ellen, we have just a few seconds left. How will you engage at the local school level? Just if you can wrap that up pretty quickly.
At the local school level, having worked on an LSC and been a chair of an LSC, as well as on the local school council advisory board, I know exactly what they are going through. I believe LSC members need to be present at board meetings. We need to hear their voice. It doesn't happen very often. If, in fact, when I do bring the board meetings to the neighborhoods, I will make sure that every LSC is invited, and hopefully we'll be able to get, sort of like the local school council advisory board, an LSC member at each board meeting so we could hear what's really going on at the local level.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your enthusiasm and answers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Zacher, we are now ready for you. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be here and just let you know something about myself and my background and why I think I'm the best candidate. I have a long history of working in the education justice movement and also a long history of working as a teacher in CPS because I just retired less than a month ago. Yeah, I didn't.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't retire in order to do this. That came later. I view working within the education justice movement as also including the fight for low-income housing, the fight for decent, affordable health care, for police accountability, because all of those things impact our students. So I've actually been involved in all of those things for 4.5 decades. But I'm not going to tell you about all of them because that would take too long. So I'm just going to give you a little flavor through the decades of some things I've done in terms of the education movement itself. So in the 80s, when I was a young parent, because I had a daughter who I did send through our local CPS schools, I was part of something called the Parent Equalizers of Chicago. And that group, the main thing that we worked on was to get rid of a very racist and classist reading program that was foisted on the neighborhood schools and not in the magnet schools. An example of the inequity that exists within Chicago public schools. So that campaign was successful. We were involved in 300 schools, and that movement led to Mayor Harold Washington's Education Summit and eventually the LSCs. I've served on LSCs as a parent member at 2 different schools, and I've also served on LSCs as a teacher member. As a parent member, so now we're in the 90s, although I was the first LSC chair at Stockton Elementary, which is now Courtney. I also worked as a parent advocate, and I started a campaign about lead poisoning. So we got hundreds of children tested for lead poisoning, tens of children treated for lead poisoning, and I spearheaded the campaign to get lead removed from Stockton School. I became a teacher in 1996, but continued my advocacy work. So I'm a member of Northside Action for Justice. And as a member of that group, I worked against privatization, so against charter school expansion, against closing schools. I was a member of Grassroots Education Movement, which worked on the elected representative school board for a decade, as well as working on sustainable community schools. And right now I am the co-facilitator of the Anti-Racist Educator Committee of Sustainable Community Schools. As a teacher, I've taught in my own community for those 28 years, but at all different grade levels. So 3rd, 5th, all of middle school, and most recently high school at Uplift Community High School, which I co-founded with 2 colleagues when the board decided to close Arai Middle School as part of Renaissance 2010. And we didn't want a charter school to take over our neighborhood school. I've seen a lot of things as a classroom teacher, and you know, there's a lot of things that are going on now that weren't true even 5 years ago, never mind 10 or 15 years ago, that we really need to address as a board. So a few have been mentioned, like the need to figure out how we're going to truly serve migrant students. At my school, we got a huge influx, no resources from CPS, no guidance whatsoever. And teachers had classrooms of half English speakers, half Spanish speakers. They didn't speak Spanish, and it was really extremely challenging. But that's only one of many, many challenges, right? How are we going to make sure that our students get their mental health needs met, their social and emotional learning needs met in this post-COVID world? What are we going to do about cell phones and social media in the classroom? You might think that's a joke, but it is not. It is having a huge impact in many, many schools, and those are things that we need to address. We need to look at what other school systems are doing successfully and see what we can apply here, right? Those are that's some experience I have, some background I have in terms of what I would like to see happen. Lots of things, of course, but just, am I out of time?
You are about out of time, sorry.
Okay, maybe you'll ask me questions about
Yes, and sneak that in. People, if there were questions you asked at the beginning of the chat that you want to see again. Okay, Jack Leiden, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you, Karen. You touched on it a little bit. I guess I just have a question. I understand that you are a progressive activist, or have been an activist regarding progressive causes, some of which you discussed. So I'm just wondering, as a board member, how will you or advance those progressive policies within CPS and obviously with the students?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, I mean, I honestly believe in being an activist board, and I think several people on here have already talked about, for example, the need for more funding. And so I think uniting the board with CPS and CTU and the mayor and the business community and our city elected officials to make a demand in Springfield, not just for what is rightfully owed CPS, but for other sources of progressive revenue is one form of activism. I think that that we need to look at education as a holistic enterprise. So yes, we absolutely need to improve what's going on in the classroom, but our students are whole people who live in whole families, in whole communities, and we need to address that entire context, right? So I'm going to just say that I do not disagree when the CTU says we need to worry about housing our houseless students, right? There are 20,000 houseless students in CPS. And as someone who was just a teacher, I know how much not having a place to live, not being sure what you're going to eat, having, experiencing trauma, all those things. Our students are not ready to learn unless we address those things, right? So we have to do all of those things. And that's activism I think I would bring to it. And I'm so glad that you said something about the students, right? So I was the student voice facilitator at Uplift. That means, basically giving students a way to have input on school policies. And I absolutely believe that that students have a whole lot of really brilliant things to say, and we should be regularly hearing from them about what they see as their needs and interests and their ideas for solutions as well. And I think as a board member, I would definitely be going to schools to hear from students as well as parents about those ideas. I hope that answered your question sufficiently.
He says yes.
Okay.
Karen, can you address how resources around or defunding selective enrollment schools or the selective enrollment neighborhood school resource balance?
Sure. So I would never want to close a school, and I think that was never anybody's intention, actually. And I do think that there is an equity issue and has been for a long time, and that when we fight for those more resources from Springfield, which we absolutely need to fight for, that we need to ensure that the resources are equitably distributed to under-resourced schools so that every neighborhood school is one that parents are proud to send their children to. In terms of taking away resources from selective enrollment schools. So I don't want to be as blanket as maybe some people have been. So in general, I don't support that. I've talked to someone from the LSC at LaSalle who was telling me about, a bunch of language teachers taken out of a language school. Like, I don't understand the logic of that. But I also think that there are situations, because we've run into them in my school, which is not a selective enrollment school, where sometimes we are providing classes for a very small number of students, and maybe having extra teachers that you can do that with does not come before providing enough students at another school. But I have to say that I would have to do more research to know whether that was indeed the situation. I just know that it was in some circumstances, even at my school.
Thank you. Anne, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Karen. Nice to meet you. Question for you. I have worked very closely with CTU over the years. I knew Karen, held her in high regard, worked with Stacy when she was in Springfield all the time. And I would say for the most part, we've been on the same page on issues, but not always. Every now and then, my job as a representative will require me to take a different path because that's what I hear from my community. As the elected school board member, it's actually called elected representative school board. You'll be representing the whole community, and the 4th district includes a lot of my district. How will you handle situations where CTU may take a particular position, and I know you're endorsed by CTU, but you'll hear different things on the ground, or your mutual constituents will feel a different way? I might, mention Senate Bill 303 is a possible example of that. I heard a lot from people. Kind of what's your general thoughts about that balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think that I'm a robot where I would just, do whatever someone else said. I fully intend to spend full time in this position and do a lot of research and make sure that I am extensively reaching out to my community. I also intend, though, to bring information from the board to my community because I think full information goes in both directions. So I guess I would just say I can certainly see myself taking a different position. And then I also want to be honest that I think that a lot of things that CTU is fighting for in the current contract are things we should all want for our schools, right? Like we should all want a librarian in every school. We should all want a social worker or a nurse in every school. We should all want good mental health services in every school. We should want green schools and the opportunity for our students to have access to jobs in green technology. So yeah, I mean, it might, I don't know. I have to see what the conflict is over, I guess, before I say, but yeah, I do intend to represent my district.
With our fast, I think we know the answer to this. Thank you for that answer, by the way. Would you take the endorsement of the INCS?
No.
Okay. Figure we should be
that for a long time.
explicit on that. Let me ask you the question that I said earlier about violence and how our students are disproportionately affected. How do you see the board's role helping with the violence that affects our students?
Yeah, so you all probably know that the board has been talking about whole school safety plans, right? And I think that is so important. So I come from a high school, right? I'll just say my high school voted in the first year to get rid of our SRO. And we've really wanted to embrace, and we want to embrace generally within CPS, and CPS has been talking about this for some years, but just not really fully supported it financially. We have to build restorative culture, right? Like, inside of the school, if you want to create a safe environment, that means making sure that you are providing relationships for students, that they feel like there are adults that they can trust, that you are addressing their mental health needs, that you are, making sure that the things that go into students acting a certain type of way are not present within your building. And I'm just going to say that sure, you could give a police officer 40 hours of training, but that does not make them a counselor or a social worker. And that's what we need to address those issues. And I think it's not wholly different from treatment, not trauma, right? Where we want to say that if someone's having a mental health incident.
I want to give you the chance to answer a couple other questions.
Okay, sorry. I talked too
No,
much.
that's okay. We have, Dan wanted to know if CPS or if the board would be able to be involved in curriculum questions or curriculum choices, like providing more training in specific schools, a program that could benefit from expansion, he says.
I'm sorry, I'm not grasping.
Can the board play a role in curriculum changes? An example being teaching students more practical skills, introducing them to trades and other job training placement.
Oh, heck yes. So, there's an overall program called CTE, so Career and Technical Education. There's actually a lot of desire to expand that program to include more trades. So absolutely the board would be involved in that. There's a lot of controversy, I'll just say, over Skyline, which is the CPS program that, has been proposed, and it has some good things about it, but it also has some weaknesses. So yes, I think absolutely the board would get involved in that. And I think that that those are places also where students and parents need to have a say in what kinds of CT.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for your enthusiastic answers. We appreciate it. And we are going.
We went on mute.
Sorry, we're going to move on to the last candidate, Dr. Carmen Giosa. Go ahead.
Thank you, Eileen. Thanks, everyone, for inviting me out tonight. I have to say my heart totally belongs to teachers. As an immigrant myself, my parents, we were a very strong family. Work ethic was strong. We were a very proud family, but it was teachers who really took us under their wing and supported me and helped me learn English. And what's so crucial about that is that it supported my whole family. So I owe a lot to teachers. And so I became a teacher back in 2001. And I taught for almost 10 years at Schurz High School at the corner of Milwaukee and Edison. High minority, high poverty school. I adored those students. I adored the families. And it was an honor to be able to give back. I truly saw my mission as an Italian teacher. I was born in Italy, to be able to share my culture and love of language with children. But it was a really beautiful bond in the sense that now we talk a lot about in the education circle, culturally responsive education and what it means to create and build those bridges with teachers and students in the classroom and families. And I feel like I was able to live that out both in my own education as a child, but then too as a teacher. Building and elevating and empowering children and families is at the core of who I am. And that is truly my passion in life. And it led me all the way back to my alma mater, U of I, where I was able to get my doctorate in education leadership and policy. Both of my kids helped me get through that. And that was so beautiful of an experience. And it's truly because I want to give back, because students are everything. Any child at any moment can be the next president, could be the next senator, could be the next representative, could be the next teacher. And so we have no idea of knowing, right? And so I believe that wholeheartedly. And as I have the absolute pleasure and honor to be teaching in different schools of education, and now currently at National Louis University through the CPS residency program. I have been in classrooms with mentor teachers and what we call our residents who in a traditional school of education would be student teachers, but they're residents because they work 4 days a week with a teacher in the classroom and build with the knowledge of a classroom teacher, come to the university to get their education degree, and then have a coach who I've also coached residents where I would go out to their schools, observe their lessons and give feedback. Growing teachers is one of the most beautiful jobs I think anyone could have. And so going back to the history of how my relationship with Chicago Public. So I started as a day-to-day sub until I received my own education degree and taught at Schurz High School for many years, then went to the Board of Ed and worked in the Office of Teaching and Learning. For a year and a half, I traveled the city because I was under my job was to bring the MTSS policy to Chicago Public Schools. Before I started, I want to say 2010, CPS did not have a policy on how we would provide academic and social emotional interventions to our students. I, in a year and a half, pretty much entered almost every single elementary school in CPS, both elementary and high school, and touched bases with almost every principal. And we call them network chiefs today, but they used to be called area officers back then, I believe was the term. As we talked about, what do you have in your school that you can use to help support learning gaps and even emotional and behavioral gaps in the classroom? I'll never forget the experience of whiteboarding with then CEO Huberman and kind of showing him how this idea of interventions and how teachers can take material that's already there, the resources that are already there, and how we can apply it. But also, very specifically, once you've identified the gap, we know exactly what we need to do to fill it. Thank you, Eileen. And so I am a mom as well. I have 2 children in Chicago Public Elementary. And I've been on the local school council for many years as well. So that is me. Nice to meet you all.
Great. Thank you very much. Good timing. Okay, we're going to start questions. So let's go ahead and jump in about equity. If
Sure.
you go ahead, Ivan, why don't you go ahead and ask it how you want to?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out because it's so
Sure.
a complicated question right here. The point is we have lots of different needs among students, vastly different needs, and they're not just because they're different people, it's because they're coming from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic problems, disabilities, trauma. How do you get the board to take up these issues without harming other students? What do we do to improve the schools for everyone without leaving anyone behind?
Sure. Great question, Ivan. I ran to my file cabinet because there's this picture I wanted to share with you when we talk about equity. And you asked, even, for example, a child in a wheelchair and how are they accessing even a playground where they can be a part just with everyone else. The board is a very complicated place, being a person who brought a resolution before the Board of Ed many years ago. Data is how I have found to be the best way of telling a story. I'm an adamant storyteller. And so I would love to be able to paint this scenario for the board, showing what we already have, but then identifying where some of the gaps are. Clinicians, I have met the most extraordinary clinicians in my career at Chicago Public Schools. We're talking the most amazing social workers, speech pathologists, psychiatrists, extraordinary people that if we gave them more voice and if we gave them more invitations, the idea of bringing a team, a wraparound of highly trained professionals around a child or a group of children to help identify and support their learning and development is one of the most beautiful things. We do this in the medical field, right? When any of us have a serious condition, you have a massive team that comes around and says, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And that's how we treat a patient. Children aren't patients by any stretch of the means, but they have needs. And I know we can address them all. Chicago is very rich with resources and we can do it. I'm confident in that.
Thank you. Let's have you talk about the selective enrollment schools. Would you reduce funding or any support for selective enrollment schools?
Absolutely not. I have no idea of knowing what child could go to that school. I couldn't do that.
And do you have thoughts about how to balance the funding of selective enrollment schools, funding the neighborhood schools?
It is truly something that has kept me up at night. I couldn't even tell you some of the thoughts I have in possibly 2 minutes, but it requires a lot more of a conversation. And I really, truly believe CPS didn't know some of the school budgets. They didn't know some of the schools who would have taken, I know somebody mentioned earlier LaSalle. The loss of those teachers at LaSalle, I believe is detrimental. I know language is very passionate to my heart. But those children didn't deserve that. Those families didn't deserve that. We had a new budget this year. We are learning about it. And we need to make some potential changes. But it was our first attempt, right? The acronym FAIL, the first attempt in learning. And I truly believe there's only a better way to go from here.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a few new questions that have come
Sure.
up. What would you prioritize, and how would you build and use your relationships with other elected bodies to advance what CPS needs? What do you feel CPS needs most right now?
That would probably take an hour, but I will tell you what my priorities are. Early literacy is fundamental, I believe, to Chicago and to our children. And by that, I mean having CPS come out with what they believe is a very structured learning to read program. And I say that, and I want to focus in on the birth to the 5-year-old age range, because I truly believe that if we're teaching young children how to read, we're teaching families like my own how to read. And so together as a family, we are going to elevate and encourage the love of learning, but also it's a complete commitment by our city. Boston has an amazing program, and I would love to advocate and try to convince people that CPS should go in a very similar route. We have a great program out in a partnership with the University of Chicago, the 30 Million Words organization in partnership. I believe words matter, but also the vocabulary is important for us to teach to all. Something else I would really love to see in terms of school health. There's a lot that's going on with our children. We see an epidemic in breathing airway disorders. And something as simple as if you notice when you're in a classroom, mouth breathers, there's a lot of research around what that is doing to our depleted sleep, but also how it is affecting our brain development and our reactions. But there's a huge school health component we could bring in. And talent. The city is so rich with talent. I would be interested in looking at some of the board policies around any type of barriers or restrictions, especially to get high need teachers into our city and are potentially leaders.
Great. Okay, another question that came up is the board and CTU have historically had a contentious relationship. How will you make sure that this new elected board is collaborative?
Being a leader in any sector requires bringing people together. And you have to listen to each other, because the power in the collective is so much greater than in just one person. I believe, as just a teacher, my class was my everything. Those students in my classroom, we were a family for a whole year. We can build relationships. And I was also trying to run really quickly to address a question that Ann Williams had. State Rep Williams sent a letter to all of the newly elected local school council members, thanking us and welcoming us to this idea of service, right, to our public schools. And that was really precious to me, and I couldn't find it really quick too. But I've also, reached out to my own local alderman to come and speak to our elementary school on some policy that he had before the city council. And the kids were flabbergasted that somebody came to talk to them in an after-school setting. Children, I know how to bring kids together, and I know I could bring adults together as well.
Great. And do you see your role working with the elected officials. Well, you just said you did that at your school, so that's great. How would you work on the local level with the schools?
Continuing to talk and network with some of the different LSCs that I've been in contact with, but different families, our kids, friends go to different schools, and I know what's out there. I'm also kind of old in terms of the CPS landscape, and I've seen a lot. We have a lot of work to do, and I sometimes feel that some of our schools find themselves so siloed, and they really shouldn't be. There's so much wealth throughout the city. I just want to navigate and put people together.
Great, thank you. And lastly, I'm sorry, it's the end of a long evening. Did I ask you if you would accept the endorsement of the INCS yet?
No, that's the charter organization.
The charter organization.
Yes, no, thank you, Eileen.
Okay, great. I don't think we have any further questions. Carmen, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
There was a question earlier about career technical, somebody asked.
Yeah. Go ahead and answer.
So please go to my old high school, Schurz website, Carl Schurz High School. They have an amazing CTE program. I wrote a little bit about this in a brief when I was at the university. Career technical education, CPS also has an office. It's beautiful what we do. I was a part of the Finance Academy when I was at Schurz. And that is amazing. And our auto tech teacher was amazingly brilliant. So we have great things happening at our neighborhood schools, just as we do also in our selective enrollment schools.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to turn this off so we don't have
Okay.
to go off. But thank you so much. Thank you to all of the candidates. Thank you to community members who participated. We really appreciate your time. The outcome of this, we will let you know down the road, but mostly we really just wanted to meet everybody. And thank you so much for all of your enthusiasm. Now we are going to say goodbye to all the candidates and all the people not on the 47th Ward Dems Committee. Brooke and Carla can stand as well. So thank you, everybody. Good night to those of you who are leaving.
Thank you, everyone.